Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Got some financial insight for you today, talking contracts with J.I. Halsell, an NFL agent and former salary cap guy with the Redskins. You can follow him on Twitter at SalaryCap101. We talk about a number of Redskins, Trent Williams' value among others, Brandon Scherff, Erick Flowers, Quinton Dunbar, talk about them all. And then about potential free agent targets. What might it cost to sign Austin Hooper at tight end or James Bradbury at corner? And then it's me and you. I answer your mailbag questions and provide updates on the linebacking core, as well as why this situation compares to the Marty Schottenheimer season. But first, my conversation with J.I. Halsell. Now I'm joined by J.I. Halsell. For people who have been around the Redskins for a while, you should know that name. He used to be a salary cap guy with the Redskins, was on ESPN 98 as an insider. He's an NFL agent. So he's kind of covered and seen everything in this business from a financial perspective, especially. So he's a great guest. And J.I., thank you very much for joining me. The question I want to start with is Trent Williams. That's obviously the big topic here. When you look at this situation, how would you think, what is the best way for this to end up? Where's the best end up going?
I mean, I think, as is the case with a lot of situations in the NFL, money can cure a lot. And so, look, obviously Trent had his reservations, his issues with the prior regime. With Ron taking over, I think to a certain degree, there's a little bit of a clean slate there, perhaps. Sure. But what I think definitely puts this over the top is if you're willing to pay Trent Williams accordingly. At this point in the left tackle market, Trent's not even one of the top 5 highest paid left tackles in football. You've got guys like DJ Humphries making a little under $15 million per year, which is still more than Trent Williams.
Right.
And so if you want to woo him back, I think if you take care of him from a compensation standpoint, I think that goes a long way.
Do you think that there's any way, because I've heard all sorts of theories, and my thought is at this point, it's best to extend him, because if he had played last year, you're going to be extending him at this point anyway. So it's not like it's an outlandish thing by any means. There's another side where you say, well, you don't want to get rid of him now because you'd have to find another tackle, so you have him for another year, and maybe you can start that whole process next year if you don't want to pay him. Is there any way it makes sense for him to come back playing out the last year of his contract?
I think that from a Trent Williams standpoint, if you know that if you delay a decision on a contract extension right now, just play out the last year of your deal, and you go to the market, there's a chance that someone might want to pay you $19 to $20 million per year.
Right.
So, but that's all part of any negotiation that we talk about, whether we're talking about Trent Williams, whether we're talking about any other high-end player. And so the Redskins, from a contract negotiation standpoint, need to make a compelling proposal that makes sense for Trent to give that up. And, in addition to the proposal, it's got to be, the conversation that he just recently had with Coach Rivera. And, when he takes all of those things into consideration, that'll, from a Trent Williams perspective, frame up whether or not he takes the money now or just plays out this deal and sees what the market is willing to pay him.
How much does that Lane Johnson deal factor into this? I mean, I have to assume that if I'm Trent Williams, I'm going to look at that and say, if you're giving Lane Johnson $18 per year, I'd like a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's not by chance that I threw out that number of $19 million, $20 million per year.
Right.
Because, there's going to be a couple of offensive tackles this offseason who get new deals. Now, I don't think any of them rise to the level of Lane Johnson's 18. But the point is that if Anthony Costanzo comes back to Indianapolis and they give him 17, and we already know that Trent Brown's making 16.5 and Lane Johnson's making 18, why wouldn't, if I'm Trent Williams, why wouldn't I just roll the dice on myself and, wait for a team next offseason to pay me 19 or 20?
Well, and I think the other factor here too is I think like Laramie Tunsil's in the last year of his deal. So I wonder if there's going to be an extension, and I wonder how, if you're Trent Williams, do you wait to see what happens with him, or do you just say, well, I'm going to try and sign one now?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, Trent's made a lot of money in his career, right? He's a product of the old rookie compensation system. So, he's got the financial wherewithal to, defer making a decision on a contract extension with the Redskins now and wait to see for these other data points to materialize. And yeah, one of those significant data points is going to be Laramie Tunsil. And again, that only sets Trent up to really capitalize in free agency next offseason.
So in your view, it almost seems like you either extend them now, or do you just, if you're not going to extend them, you just trade them, you think?
From a Redskins perspective, and this isn't, anything unique to Trent Williams, with players who are in the final year of their deal, they are trade candidates. And particularly if it's a player you do not feel like you can come to some sort of monetary agreement with, then to answer your question, then yes, if you don't feel like you can come to an agreement with Trent on an extension, then you look to trade him.
And I think another guy that's in a similar spot is Quinton Dunbar, who actually wants to be traded or released if he doesn't get an extension. And I would think that in his situation, if you're the Redskins, he's probably a little bit easier to trade, given that it seems like maybe it seems like Trent Williams probably still would like to be here if the money works out. I think with Quinton Dunbar, it may be that you hear those kind of demands and your preference would be to trade him.
Yeah, he's definitely got, a contract that's easily tradable. That's part of his gripe, if you will, is that he makes
it is a great
money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's played well when he's been healthy.
Yeah, and, I would imagine that from his perspective, he's going to make, I think, under $4 million this year. There's a good chance that the Redskins go and sign a corner or two in free agency this offseason who are going to make double, triple what he makes. And so when you kind of bring all of those factors together, the Redskins moving on from him via trade could make some sense for both parties, because now you get something in return for a disgruntled player. And then for Quinton Dunbar, a team that trades for him is not going to just trade for him for the 1 year at under $4 million. They're going to want to do an extension.
Right.
So it's a win-win in that scenario.
And I think you hit on it too. Like, how it can go. If you have a player coming back in that situation, if you don't trade him and you don't extend him, the potential for it to be bad is there.
And real quick, I mean, it's one of the lessons I learned from working on the team side of the business, working at the Redskins. One of the things that Erick Flowers kind of taught me is that you never really want a player walking around your locker room feeling like the team is getting over on him from a compensation standpoint. And it's clear at this juncture that Quinton Dunbar feels that way.
Absolutely.
And so as you're trying to change the culture, you're trying to mold a locker room, moving on from Quinton Dunbar could again be a win-win situation.
And then you look at Brandon Scherff. So again, 2 years, another guy. Every guy we seem to talk about is like, well, when healthy, he could do this. But another guy who's really good but hurt the last 2 years, he's free. He'd be considered a top guard. Do you think if he's on the market, that he resets the guard market? And what would you do with him?
Oh, absolutely. If Brandon Scherff is a unrestricted free agent, see, being an unrestricted free agent and how much money you earn in free agency is not a function necessarily of your health. It's not a function necessarily of your productivity on the field. It's a function of supply and demand.
Right.
And it's just hard to find linemen in general, but let alone offensive linemen who play at a high level. And therefore, there would be significant demand for his services if he were a free agent. So that being said, as you're Brandon Scherff and you're contemplating doing an extension with the Washington Redskins, it's got to make sense for you to give up that opportunity to see what the market is willing to pay you. So and the Redskins have the possibility of tagging him, and I've heard that, he doesn't want to be tagged. And being tagged as an offensive lineman effectively pays you as a tackle, even though in his case as a guard, right? So it's going to be lucrative for him either way. He is well within his right to demand to be the highest paid offensive guard in football.
And I think you're right. If I'm him, I know he wouldn't want to be tagged. I also wonder if that might be the best way to go, to tag and then to continue negotiating. Now, we saw here with Kirk Cousins that didn't quite work, but typically that seems what a lot of teams like to do, correct?
They do. And, I mean, you've also seen this recent trend of players being tagged and traded.
Right.
So you've seen that with defensive ends the past couple of years. And the tag is really just a placeholder to extend your negotiation timeline until mid-July with Brandon Scherff in this example. And if you ultimately find that you're not making any headway, then you can decide to move on from him via trade. Yeah,
and I think like the part of me wonders too if they would just say, well, let's see. And I also wonder if both sides would want to see where is this going here with Ron Rivera and this new regime, because even though fans can look and see all this optimism, I think there are some players there who after a while just get beaten down by a situation, and no matter what, and I'm not saying Brandon does or doesn't, but I wonder if that would factor into his decision to want to sign long-term now, and also theirs to see, well, where is his health? Again, this guy, Rivera's coming in and taking over a team, and all of these players we're talking about have health issues. So do you think that might factor in at all, or is that overthinking it?
Look, if they were to just give him a big bag of money that you just can't pass up, then I think you take that.
Yeah.
In lieu of that, then yes, for both sides, kind of playing the wait and see how this all kind of meshes game via the application of the franchise tag could make some sense. But from a Brandon Scherff standpoint, again, this is a guy who has an extensive injury history. Right. I'm sure he would prefer to secure his compensation future sooner rather than later, but it's got to make sense.
And security always matters. I remember way back in the day, players saying they wouldn't sign if a guy came here, and then they sign, and they say, well, security, and that does matter to everybody. Erick Flowers is the other guard. What do you think his market is and what his value is on the market?
I think Erick proved the last season that, look, I'm not saying that he's an elite offensive guard, but he has proven to be a solid starter at guard. And when you look at the guard market, while you've got guys like Andrew Norwell in Jacksonville is making $13 million per year, it's not going to cost you a ton of money. Like, could Erick Flowers command $7, $8, $9 million per year? He could, because that's kind of what just solid guards make. So I don't see him getting in excess of $10 million per year, but I could definitely see him making kind of in that 8 to 9 range.
I want to then now turn a little bit for a couple minutes to some outside the market. And when we're looking at free agency, that corner market, it looks like there's a good crop of corners out there with Jones and Bradbury and Harris and Logan Ryan. Where do you think that market is going to go?
I think with all those names you just mentioned are going to be unrestricted free agents. But you're also going to have some guys who, in all likelihood, are going to be cap casualties and released. Guys like Tremaine Johnson, guys like Xavier Rhodes. And that's actually going to a certain degree, hurt the cornerback market, right? Because, again, it goes back to simple supply and demand, right? And the more supply of competent corners that are out there on the market, the lower the price is going to be that clubs are willing to pay. Unless you've got, some scheme-specific reason for wanting to go after a particular guy. Obviously Seattle likes really long corners like Quinton Dunbar, actually. Right. And so a guy like Xavier Rhodes or Tremaine Johnson might appeal to them. But again, I think that those guys who will become street free agents via cap casualty will kind of reduce the market for the unrestricted free agents to a certain degree.
So who do you look at the top of that market? Do you look at it as Byron Jones setting that market? And where would a guy like, because again, the guy here who always is connected to the Redskins is James Bradbury because of his connection to Rivera. But I do think like Byron Jones fits a lot of teams too. So who do you look at setting that market?
Yeah, there's no one that is going to command the type of money that a Jalen Ramsey's going to command when he ultimately gets his deal, right? But I also think that there's no one that we've talked about just now that is going to exceed Xavier Howard at $15 million per year. You know, when you think about Chris Harris, he's older. Think about Byron Jones. While he's versatile, he hasn't finished on the ball. He's not super productive statistically. When you think about James Bradbury, he's the physical profile in terms of what you're looking for in a long physical corner. And specific to Washington, he's got the familiarity with Ron. But I don't think that any of those guys have the characteristics that get you above 15, where Xavier Howard is.
Okay.
So, you know, could I see those guys ending up in that 12, 14 million per range? Sure. But I don't think anybody's resetting the market via free.
Because I was wondering too with that, you know, some people have said that it's been stagnant there for a while, and they wondered in Bradbury's position, they say, listen, you paid Josh Norman $15 million to come here. You already know me, pay me the same. You know, and you can ask for whatever you want. Doesn't mean they'll get it, but that's what there was one scenario floated.
Yeah, again, supply and demand, though.
Right.
And so it's one of those situations where, okay, if James, you don't want to take our $13 million per year, then perhaps Byron Jones will.
And there you go. And then the other position is tight end. How do you view this market going? Because there are a couple guys that seem to be attractive. You know, Austin Hooper, Hunter Henry. Where do you think that one is going?
You know, the tight end market is actually really interesting because that is one of the positional markets that has truly been stagnant. And when you think about the growth of the wide receiver position, right, where Odell Beckham's getting 18 and Michael Thomas is above that, as a pass catcher, tight ends, the top of the market is Jimmy Graham at $10 million per year.
Right.
Like offensive guards are making more than that.
Right.
So I could definitely see Austin Hooper easily surpassing Jimmy Graham. It's crazy. Travis Kelce is arguably one of the top 2 or 3 tight ends in football. He makes $9.4 million per year.
It's amazing.
So I definitely see Austin Hooper resetting the tight end market, and he could do it by a significant amount.
And, you know, and I would wonder too, like with Hunter Henry, what'll happen with him just because the injury passed. And it also seems like the Chargers will try and keep him. But
I mean, with Hunter Henry, and this is with any player kind of at any position, I used to be of the thought that, you know, a particular player who's injured in his contract year, it would negatively impact what they could go get in free agency. And then I saw Muhammad Wilkinson a few years back break his leg and still make a ton of money in free agency. And so, you know, Hunter Henry, you know, he was out at the beginning of last season but came back to play. Just from a structure standpoint, you can always structure the deal to mitigate some of your injury concerns, whether it's, you know, per game roster bonuses so that every game he's on the 46-man roster, he earns a little extra money. But at the end of the day, again, supply and demand. It's hard to find those guys. And he's another player. It would not surprise me if he surpassed the $10 million per year mark, and he just probably will have some mechanisms in his contract structure that mitigate the injury history.
How do you think the Redskins, with knowing what you know about Rivera, would you think they'll be aggressive?
It's hard to say because what we know of Ron is as a coach, right? We don't know about Ron, the personnel leader, right? We know that Kyle Smith has been in the building, right? And we know kind of what the Redskins' recent approach has been in free agency. And quite frankly, they just haven't been big spenders, and they've really been kind of second-tier guys. It would not surprise me if they remain kind of second-tier spenders in free agency. There may be one guy that they go spend some money on, whether that's Hunter Henry or an Austin Hooper. But by and large, I don't, because of the continuity with a Kyle Smith kind of leading the front office part of this, I don't foresee them being big spenders. And also, Ron, my sense is that Ron, wants to build this thing kind of the right way, doesn't want to make a big splash in free agency, kind of going back to the old ways of the Redskins. And, while I'm sure he would love to have James Bradbury, it's got to be at the right price point.
I definitely think, J.I., that the mindset there is they don't have to build this all in one offseason. So anybody who assumes a trade in the draft, that's incorrect, because they don't feel like you have to get 5 picks to get all these talent in now. They want to build it with the right people at the right time, so at the right pace. So that said, they may do anything. But the last thing I wanted to ask you about is at the combine. What an agent does at the combine. What are some of the things that are going now? How many meetings are guys taking during this time? And what are do you know when you're there what probably will happen in free agency after you leave?
You don't know, with 100% certainty, but you definitely you walk away from the combine with a ballpark in terms of what is going back to this concept of supply and demand. What is the demand going to be for my client when you talk about from the agent perspective?
Right.
Same thing from a club perspective. You have a certain sense for which players will fit within our price point. And again, you're not going to know with 100% certainty, but you will have a certain ballpark. The tough thing about the combine, at least from an agent perspective, is that clubs really aren't talking about a lot of numbers and specific details around contracts and negotiations there. They're going to talk more in generalities, but again, you will know if a team has an interest in your guy or not. So, and that's definitely helpful. But over the next couple of weeks, as we go into the start of the league year and the legal tampering period, a couple of days before the start of free agency, you'll start, getting a better sense for more details.
Do you sometimes know going in? Because I know I've talked to guys in the past, and there's a little bit of a, teams might call in and check on, say, hey, I'm just calling to see how so-and-so is doing. Make sure his health is, make sure he's doesn't have a cold or whatever. So you kind of have a sense of going into that, even what the interest might be?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I might be calling a team about another client, right? And if by chance, the conversation comes up about another one of my clients, then, you can read between the lines. Right. And you know what? It's also not about guys that are impending free agents. Some of the other things that are talked about in the days leading up to the combine, at the combine, and the days thereafter are, whether or not a team is interested in extending a player, or whether or not a team is considering terminating a player. So, a lot of these conversations are ongoing as we speak. And, there's definitely a lot of gauging going on these days.
And just, I appreciate your time, Jay. And the very last thing I want to ask you about is, and I forgot to ask you about this earlier, but you brought up the extensions, and we were talking about other guys. Ryan Kerrigan also in the last year of his contract. I have been told a couple of times that the expectation is that he would be extended. Given his age, he's 31, he's been productive, but they also might draft Chase Young, and they already have Montez Sweat. What do you think would a good extension would look like for him?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he rises to the level of Cameron Jordan, who just did an extension at the new money average per year, $17.5 million per year, because Cameron Jordan is 31 years old, right? So he is kind of a data point, right, in terms of an older edge rusher getting an extension. I'm still not certain, though, that Ryan Kerrigan gets to that number. I think the biggest thing with Ryan Kerrigan and how you structure his deal is you're probably not going to commit a lot of guaranteed money because, to your point, you know that you've got some young guys at the position. You also know that you got to pay some guys along your defensive line, second contract coming up pretty soon here. So you can't commit that money to a guy who's on the back end of his career. And so I think, again, if it makes sense in terms of how you're managing your cap, and the Redskins have plenty of cap space. There's 60+ million in terms of cap space, but you still need to be conscious of how much you're paying to a guy on the back end of his career versus those guys who are still on the come and on the cusp of getting second contracts.
I think in an ideal world too, they would probably, because he's at 11.5 this year. I think in an ideal world, they'd want to lower that a little bit in exchange for getting some more years from him.
Yeah, and that mechanically, from a cap management standpoint, that's why you do an extension with a lot of players, is really just to get the cap relief. But again, they're not in a bad, cap position. And that $60+ million of cap space is inclusive of, Alex Smith's $20+ million cap number, right? So they're in great position from a cap standpoint. So it just needs to make sense from a where you value him standpoint. Otherwise, while I know that they would like to get something done, it also wouldn't surprise me if they let him play out the final year of this deal.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up Alex Smith too, because that's the other one. But he's going to be around this year because we've talked about the cap number and hit from him before, and it's going to be hard to really do anything about him until next year. So, anyways, with that said, Jay, I appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining me. And keep enjoying that nice warm weather out in Arizona.
Oh no, I appreciate you for having me, man.
After this break, I'll be back to answer your mailbag questions. Is anyone with the Redskins pushing for Tua? And then Chase Young or Isaiah Simmons? Who could have the bigger impact? Okay, now it's time for the mailbag. I have a bunch of questions, so let's get into it. Washington D. Haskins at KingHTTR. What can Chase Young do during the combine, non-workout of course, or pro day, if anything, that can hurt his draft stock regardless of how much? The easiest question I have to answer here. It's very short. He can get hurt or have a big red flag with his health, or he could be a jackass in the interviews. Otherwise, not going to hurt it one bit. See, that was easy. A process at A_process. If Dunbar is traded or holds out, will acquiring 2 starting quality cornerback free agents become mandatory? Good question, and I will say, if he's holding out, they're going to get rid of him because they're not going to put up with that. Not from a guy that because if he's coming back at that price, I definitely believe they feel like there'd be a fear he would become a bit of a cancer, or certainly not a good situation. So if he's holding out, they'll get rid of him. And after multiple conversations, this would be my guess. They'll need to add a strong starter and perhaps draft another, and I would definitely draft another. But I think if you went this route, I think you get a guy that is a starting high-level starter and then probably a mid-level guy too. You're not going to spend huge on 2 corners. That just wouldn't make sense. They have options with Fabian Moreau, who's better on the outside. I don't think Jimmy Moreland fits at outside at all what these coaches would want because of his size. Again, if they trade Dunbar, I think you're getting a 3rd or a 4th round pick back. That would give them 2 in the 3rd, and with a comp choice, 2 more in the 4th. It would be wise to draft a corner. I would not go crazy and sign 2 corners just because, again, and I can't stress this enough, this is not a team on the cusp of a Super Bowl, so they can build accordingly. Their motto will be to build it right. They know they do not have to fill every need right now. Keep that in mind throughout this entire offseason with every move they make. Gary Shelton, that Real Shelton Show, give us an idea of our linebacking core going into free agency, please. Thank you for saying please. And a listener in England, Dave Taylor, emailed us a couple weeks back, also wanted to know about the linebackers, specifically Cole Holcomb. So here's what I know. Holcomb will play outside, but they're still deciding if it's a Sam or the Will. Coverage was not a strength of his in college or last season, but he has his speed and he is smart. And I think they feel like he could develop there. I also think it depends who else is around. But anyway, that's why they're looking at Sam in addition to Will. If Reuben Foster is available, he'd be viewed as a Will. But that's if we don't even know if he'll make it back for camp. I think there's a ways to go there, so let's see what happens. But that's the spot he would play if he's around, and we don't know enough yet. Sean Dion Hamilton would play inside. They also might re-sign John Bostic, which is something at T. Cleveland Jr. wanted to know. I don't know if they'll do so. I do know that it's not closed off yet. I like Bostic. I think he's smart and a good influence. I think he's a guy that I think in the right situation could be pretty good. I think one day he'll be a really good coach if he wanted to go that route. I also know that A.J. Klein will be available if they went on a lower end guy in free agency. He backed up Luke Kuechly in Carolina, so clearly Rivera knows him well. And the Redskins did have interest in him before, nearly signed him. It was a last-minute no from a certain member of this organization that you guys did not like. Anyway, on to the next one. Chris Stone at StoneDog23. Why, John, should a long-suffering Redskins fan get sucked in again? Okay, I probably get this question every time there's a change, and I've gotten it a couple times this year in different factions, so I'm going to answer it again. Well, and again, I answer this every week, it seems. But the main reason I think that you should feel better right now is the way Rivera conducts his business. He and Kyle Smith truly seem to have a strong relationship, and I mean strong. Now, they haven't gone through the wars yet, so it should be good right now. I would say it's probably the best in terms of front office coaching staff since Marty Schottenheimer and John Schneider back in 2001. Again, no games have been played. I'm just talking about the working relationship right now. And what I like about these two is that they can hash out any disagreements in private. I don't think they're going to see a bunch of scream matches and throwing folders at each other, whatever. If they won't let it spill into public, and that alone has changed. I don't envision many times, if any, where they go to Dan Snyder to break any sort of a tie. Now, I know Ron Rivera will bring that up. I don't envision that happening. It will be two football men staying in a room and coming to a football decision. This will not be turned around overnight. But I do think that these two, plus if they added someone in, as a GM or to help out in pro personnel, I think they can be a good tandem. They need to make sure that Dwayne Haskins blossoms. If he does, thanks to what I think that Smith and Rivera could do working together, it could get fun here again. Gavin G098 at God Help the Skins. Is everyone in the Redskins organization good on Haskins, or are some dudes pushing for Tua? The sense I've gotten is that they're excited about the way Haskins ended and they like his talent. I've heard good things about him from multiple people. I've not heard of people pushing for Tua, but in fairness, I don't know that I would at this point. I highly doubt that's something anybody inside would even reveal. I think if that comes out, it's going to be because some people inside are talking to their buddies who end up talking to people like me. They are much more unified now than ever. They did plan to meet with Tua at the Combine. They owe it to themselves to do so for a couple of reasons. They need to see how he is in interviews. If he blows them away, chances are he'll do the same with other teams. And that's when you know a few teams will fall deeply in love and want to move up, or what they might be willing to do to move up. So it allows them to be more prepared for what might be coming. Also, what if they really like him? Now, I do believe durability would be a big issue here, so I would not see them taking him. But, I can't rule that out. I do know they believe they can push Haskins to being very good. So just keep that in mind. So the Tua interest to me will be more about drumming up interest as anything else. And I also think, there's a part like you kind of want to let teams know that maybe you are interested. So maybe that number 3 pick isn't the sweet spot. Maybe it legitimately is number 2. So let's also one thing to keep in mind for everybody listening, don't forget that Haskins has only started 21 combined games in college and the NFL. The dude is still an infant in his development. So I think there's you owe it. You should owe it to yourself to see it through with him and see where he does go. Unless there's some things you just don't like, then you should see where he can go. And I think they feel good, like I said, that they can push him to a good or greater heights. Let's say that. Alan Lepore, at Alan Lepore. Who would have a bigger impact on defense, Chase Young or Isaiah Simmons? I think to me that's easy. Chase Young. Edge rushers always do. Especially if they both play at a certain level, they're both playing at a certain level, then I'm taking the edge rusher. And a guy like Young can impact so many other positions. The guys next to him, the linebackers, the secondary, everybody. If it's between these two, to me it's a no-brainer. That said, Simmons in this defense could be really good. I could see him playing the will and having an impact. So the question to me would be, how big of an impact? If they feel he can be an all-pro player for them, then trading back and passing on Chase Young could end up being worth it. He would help them, no doubt, and then they'd get a lot more picks. He's a guy that if they were playing a 3-4, I definitely would wonder where he'd fit in there. but he seems really well suited for a 4-3, especially with the way the speed has gone in this game. All right, John Schechter at Schechter J. Take a deep breath, pal, because apparently he's tried this question before. He says, trying again, if Cincy does not take Burrow and takes Young, what should Washington do? Well, first of all, I think they should pray that this happens. The trade value jumps up because I think, again, with Tua's durability, I think Burrow will be looked at differently. I don't know what the Redskins would do. And I do believe they'd be much more tempted by Burrow than by Tua. Again, durability questions. My guess is they would trade out and go through a year with Haskins to see what they have. If he fails, they'll be back in the top 10 next year and probably have another first-round pick off a trade, so they would have ammo to move up. I will say this, though. They were 3-13 last year. They know that they have a long way to go. They know how important this position is. If they felt that Joe Burrow was that much better than Haskins, and I'm not saying they do, and I'm not saying, I'm not saying they do, but if they did, and he's sitting there at 2, and you think he can be a franchise changer for your team, how do you not take a guy like that? Because you think that Chase Young could be that guy, you'd take him in a heartbeat, right? I would. So I just think that that's something that to look at. It will be interesting. I don't think that scenario will present itself. All right, last one, at Diesel the Hog, at Bless Skins. Kyle Smith, do you think he's itching to get a wealth of picks for the number 2? Any Erick Flowers news? All right, Diesel. No, I don't think he's itching to get a wealth of picks. Knowing what I know about him, he's all about finding the right guy. Very process-oriented guy. This notion that having more picks is better when you're possibly passing on a possible elite player is just inaccurate. I do believe he knows this. I strongly believe if Smith thinks Chase Young is the guy, they will take him. If he's not sold, or if he's just as sold on some other guys, then you get the picks and then you get excited. You get excited because you have a chance to get really good players with that first pick. That's what gets guys excited. I think anyone who knows him would say he's not someone itching just to trade, just to get more picks. I don't think that at all. What if you're the guy who passed on Chase Young just because you wanted to get some more picks and some of these guys bust? That's not what you want either. So you've got it. I think what you should be excited about is what you're going to do, whether it's drafting Chase Young or trading back because you love Jeffrey Okudah or Isaiah Simmons at number 5. As for Flowers, discussed him earlier in the podcast, I do know they'd like to keep him. I do believe they'll try to keep him, and I think we'll have a better feel after the combine for where that is headed. That's it for this week. I know these mailbag sessions go long. I apologize. I also know you have a lot of questions. I try to get through them. A big thank you to J.I. Halsell for joining me. You can follow him on Twitter at SalaryCap101. And thank you for the questions and for listening. Talk to you later.